sunshine, and we're all left wondering.
7:27 here in the Breakfast Club of Bryan, Angus, Bill Hayes. It is Monday, January 14th, and a bloody cold one here, but it's around the temperature it should be wherever we are. Yeah.
You wimp.
That's true. I'm going to let you warm up because I know that you've got some strong feelings. We've been talking off there. We're going to come to the NFL highlights in just a second. We'll show you the highlights of that great game between Seattle and Atlanta, and we'll show you Tom Brady setting the record with when they beat Houston yesterday as well. But the big story here, of course, was first of all, Brian Burke finally broke his, not finally, but Brian Burke decided to have a press conference, clear the air, not get out of town, but just, to shuffle off and to have his say. And he did that at noon on Saturday at the ACC. You watched it, I watched it, I wrote about it, you did as well. What did you think?
Several things. I'm kind of surprised at the way that a lot of people in the media, on the media side in Toronto, were cowed by this man for 3.5 years. He mentioned in one of his answers, one of the good things about today, Steve, is I may never have to talk to you again. And he was referring to Steve Simmons. The genesis of that decision goes back to July 1st, 2011. You may remember, July 1st, of course, it's Canada Day. It's also the day of free agency in the NHL. It was the day Brad Richards went to the free agent post. And there was lots of talk that the Leafs were going to be in on that. I remember breathlessly hearing people saying the Leaf contingent is at Newport Sports, which is in Mississauga, according to Bryan, just around the corner from us. Substantially closer, by the way, than the MasterCard Center, but we won't get into that.
You're going to discover why they call him a grumpy old man in a second.
But the thing was, Burke was in Afghanistan. Now, I don't know how you feel about that. Burke thought it was an important thing to do. Simmons was the only member of the media in this town that I can recall, at any rate, who took him to task for it. He was the only one who said, what's he doing in Afghanistan? There are 3 important days on the NHL calendar for a general manager. Trade deadline day, the draft, July 1st.
Right.
You have to be there for those 3. I know Berkey's doing his thing. I'm a guy who I do a lot of things there for the other things. Well, one of the things you weren't doing that day was your job. And Simmons was the only guy who called you on it. Now, you can say a lot about Steve Simmons, and a lot of people do. And listen, I don't agree with everything he says either. But he has the balls to actually write about what he believes. In this particular case, he got taken to task for it. The Sun was behind him. They had, I think, a very good point. That was a day where he should have been there, and he should have been trying to persuade Brad Richards to come to the Leafs. He didn't do it because he's Brian Burke. And that's why Brian Burke is gone. That type of attitude, he was above it. And the thing that also drives me nuts anyway, is no one called him on it. No one other than Steve Simmons. Now, there was another issue that came up. It's a private life issue with Burke that was intimated in one of Steve Simmons' Sunday columns, but he never said what it was pertaining to. And quite frankly, again, there were rumors, somewhat vicious rumors going on, as you well know, Brian, inside hockey circles about what was going on in Brian Burke's private life. And no one, again, said anything about it except for that one instance. And Bob McKenzie, who actually happened to mention it once, again, just in passing and by no means suggesting what it was.
Suffice to say, Brian's marriage, for those of you who don't know, had fallen apart.
And there were a lot of rumors about what had happened subsequent or prior to that, that were a part of that. And I'm not going to get into it. It's not my business. And frankly, it may not have been anybody's business. But my reading of both of those situations was Simmons was only saying it was out there, and so was McKenzie when he went to it too. Very interesting to see he didn't get on Bob McKenzie. He got on Simmons, and it's because he didn't like Simmons from the Afghan thing, and now this. Brian Burke has a thin skin. He always has. He's a bully. All of his decisions aside, he somehow managed to have the media in this town in his pocket because they were all afraid of access to him, except Simmons. I got a lot of respect for Steve for the way he handled this. Now, further to that, Simmons also made a very good point yesterday that upon reflection I kind of agree with. He said in his Sunday column, a lot of people have been taking Burke to task for his failure, especially with the Phil Kessel deal. If you remember at the time, Kessel, the first summer that Burke was here, he had made a couple of signings in free agency. He traded 2 first-round picks, the next 2, and a second-round pick for Phil Kessel. Kessel actually was the 6th leading scorer in the NHL last year. He is what he is. You're not going to build a team around him, but he's a very strong piece on any team. The problem with the deal wasn't that. It was that the free agent signings that he made, and you go through the list of those, Commissar, disaster. Beauchemin, big problem. He managed to get something out of Beauchemin by trading him away and getting back Gardner and Lupul. Colby Armstrong, another one. These are all guys, they all failed, without exception. Tim Connolly, the list goes on and on. His problem was the free agents that he signed and the way he rebuilt this team. Didn't work. I think the best you can give him is maybe he's got some pieces for the future, but even that's not guaranteed. The one guy you know is going to play is Morgan Riley. Jake Gardner, I think, is going to be okay once he physically gets prepared to play. The rest of them all have question marks. So yeah, his tenure was a disappointment. He was a bully. And may I also add that one of the things that's been going on here, and if you've been watching Toronto newspapers, you know this, there's a big chasm between the Fan and TSN Radio, Rogers and Bell, the Star and the Sun. Damien Cox, say what you will, he's been in Burke's pocket for a couple of years. It was not an accident that he got the first interview with Bryan Burke after the firing.
Damien Cox, by the way, is the lead sports columnist, hockey columnist, I'd say sports columnist for the Toronto Star.
Yeah.
And for years now has been a member of Sportsnet now full-time.
And you know, he's been a big defender of Burke and continues to be. And I also believe that there's a kinship there, that they're friends, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that per se, but I do think that in this particular instance, what you've seen out of Cox is he's 100% behind Burke, and Simmons has been perceived to be 100% against him. It's all a part of something much bigger than just a couple of columnists or anything like that. It'll be really interesting to see if this is any indication, and it may well be, of how Bell and Rogers are getting together over the next few years. It'll be really interesting to watch. If you haven't noticed, the people on the Fan, McCowan, Cox, and others have suggested that George Cope from BCE is the guy who was responsible for getting rid of Bryan Burke.
Never mentioned their own boss,
Exactly,
Nadir
because they're
Mohammed.
gutless. They're afraid to do it. Because if they do that, our guy's responsible for this. It doesn't add up, and it's been something that's been bugging me since it happened. This will go away. I think it's plain and simple what this decision was. Burke kind of got into it on Saturday. They didn't want the Bryan Burke brand. The guy is a bull in a china shop. He's disheveled. He's got the tie off all the time. He's a bully. He's all kinds of different things. Certainly he's a great quote machine. And people in our business, we're going to miss him completely because Nonis is like talking to that wall. You know, he's not going to say anything of any interest. Very different sort. But from a hockey point of view, they're at least similar. So they liked what they were seeing in terms of where the future is. They didn't like the guy who was the face of the franchise. And it's pretty simple to me. That's what happened. This other stuff that's going on around will be really interesting to watch. The indications to me are that this means that the marriage between Bell and Rogers that we've seen isn't going to last.
Well, Billy, you want to get that off your chest, so and well said. I wish I could, for the sake of debate, argue with you about this because, to be honest with you, I mean, it's kind of tough to argue against a guy who's in Afghanistan with the troops and all that kind of thing all the time. No. Let me finish. Let me just finish. I can't remember the circumstances as to why he was over there at that time.
It was Canada Day.
Well, I understand that. I just can't understand, with the love he has of his team and how he's worked his ass off for it, why he would open himself up to that criticism. I can't remember the
There's
circumstances.
no good reason, Brian.
I just can't remember that. I can't remember if that's
There weren't any.
I
That's
can't
the
remember if
whole
that's
point.
the only date they could get the flight over and all the rest. I don't know. I'm sure if Burke was sitting here, he'd have the answers to you. But the point at the end of now that this is all wrapped up is, don't forget that Larry Tannenbaum, Richard Petty, Tom Anselmi, Richard Petty's lieutenant at the time, and Tannenbaum's right-hand lieutenant, Dale Lastman. I mean, that's the team that hired the brand called Bryan Burke. All that was left of that was Tom Anselmi, who, although he's got the position, is still a rubber stamp down there. And I don't mean that badly. I like Tom personally. But the fact of the matter is the power is in the hands of BCE and Rogers. And again, I know this all too well, since Rogers are the ones who let me go. I understand exactly how it works behind those corridors of power there. I do not know to this day what Nadir Mohammed has to say or George Cope had to say. I know it's what's
Nobody
being
does.
transpired.
It's all speculation.
But the fact of the matter is, I do know from the way they operate that they make these decisions behind closed doors. They give the reasons for it, then they retreat behind closed doors, and someone else talks for them. In this particular case, that someone else had to be Tom Anselmi. And if they hadn't have said what they had said, and the bottom line is, the thing we have to finish this with, is that Burke said at the beginning of all this, despite everything else that goes behind it, as we discussed last week, if the Leafs had a playoff contending team and we're going
He'd
to be
still
winning,
be there.
He'd still, as he said, what was the word he used? You can be as obnoxious as you want,
if you're winning,
as long as you're winning. And he didn't win enough, and so he took it on the
yeah.
chin.
Well, and he had to. And the other thing that he said, and he kind of started off by saying, if there's something else I can do, I'm going to go to a franchise that isn't going to be sold, because new owners.
Well, he'd
come in
like to
and
be,
they
yeah.
have their own guys.
Yeah.
That's the basic thing here is. The record was awful. It didn't appear to be getting any better. I don't think they're a playoff team. I don't think they're going to even be a contender. I don't see. I've seen some people saying, they're going to be. They're going to be.
The
really
cupboard
good now.
looks pretty bare.
There's
Bill.
not much there, and the fact of the matter is that he failed, and in the end, that's all it is. But somehow it becomes a much bigger issue in light of the Bell Rogers thing and the new ownership and who's responsible. And look. My understanding of it is we know Tannenbaum is a fan of Burke. So
absolutely.
So 25% of that board, of that ownership, was behind Burke. So it had to be the other 75%. Now, Bell's only 37.5%. That tells me Rogers was in on it too. Absolutely. But you're not hearing that,
Anyways, that is
drives you nuts, Brian.
And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to go down to practice today, and Cliff Fletcher will still be sitting there, and everything will be going on. And I'll miss Berkey just from a personal point of view, because we got a guy now who's in charge of the team, and he looks like an all-state insurance salesman to me. God bless his soul. I know he's a good hockey man and all the rest of it. And we'll see what happens under his tenure here. And someday he'll get fired here as well, and it won't be nearly as controversial as this one will be, as this one was. And I think I can only believe it won't be long at all before Berkey's brand is picked up by another one of his many contacts in the NHL. Well, I disagree. As a matter of fact, right now, and I'm only going to make it $5 so I don't hurt you too badly financially, but you and I will have a very crisp little $5 bill. Since you said he'll never have another job in the NHL,
I'll never win the bet.
I would. I could narrow it down a little bit from there to make it more difficult.
Okay.
But seriously, let me think about it, and I'll couch it, and you and I will have a $5 bet on this at the end of the day.
Now you got to keep in mind, Brian's Scottish. $5 is like this is.
I mean, I could just take that right now, and you can just give me the $5 and forget about it.
Why would you hire him?
Well, it's 7:41. We got other highlights to get to. Bryan Burke's record prior to coming here was pretty damn good.
No, it was okay. He
wasn't bad at all.
He had the good fortune of having Rob Niedermeyer on his
that thing
roster.
above his head there.
Yeah, but that's whoa. That's because he got Niedermeyer and Pronger. Pronger wanted out of Edmonton.
You can spin it any way you want to suit your argument. That's why we have them. But at the end of the day, he hasn't been a disaster, and he's well respected in this bloody league. Why do you think the NHL made him part of his committee to reform and
because he's a hardliner, that's why.
Well, and lots of teams are going to want that. Why do you think Mike Keeling kept on getting rehired? As I say to Mike, it's easier to talk to the teams you have.
He's got a very different demeanor than Burke.
I know you want to see some NFL highlights. It's 7:42. We'll take a quick break here, and we'll be right back with a really exciting, wildly exciting game between Seattle and Atlanta.